everyone, to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past shows are podcasts. You can find them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your email questions and comments, dj@ArtistFirst.com. And now here they are, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
And thank you very much, Z-Man. And I am Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret.
And in honor of the topic for tonight's show, I will not say anything for the next 55 minutes.
Don't believe him, folks. That's not happening.
No, it would be challenging. But for the next, in fact, though, tonight's topic is interesting from the point of view of, well, the origin of the quote is one of our favorites, which is Eckhart Tolle, and it's interesting because I would say in the present moment of let's say the pillars of civilization that exist upon the earth today, one of the ones which is under obvious and present attack from the point of view of almost at least certain forces seem to be wanting to eradicate this, it would be the feminine principle. And our topic tonight is a really wonderful quote by Eckhart Tolle, which I'm going to read, and I'm going to shut up for the next 56 minutes because it's going to be a very interesting show, I believe. May I read the quote?
Sure, if you want to.
Because my voice is so gone, and maybe the last thing I say that's intelligible. So here we go. As I mentioned, this is Eckhart Tolle. Suppression of the feminine principle has enabled the ego to gain absolute supremacy in the collective human psyche. And he's talking about today.
Right. Tolle is current.
Tolle is current. And we saw this, and we thought this was a really insightful and incisive topic. So we're going to just take our best stab at it. Because the thing that twigged me, Margaret, and maybe did you as well, is that somehow the feminine principle, if we think of it as well, we're going to try to maybe to give a definition of our own for it, is somehow either antithetical or opposed in some way to the ego. And what that would say to me is that Tolle is identifying the ego as a male or a non-feminine principle entity. And I think that's interesting. Maybe that's I wouldn't say that the ego is so gender specific, but maybe from this point of view it at least it's been allowed to run too far in that direction.
So you're saying that the ego is a more male-oriented principle?
I think Tolle is saying that here. If he's saying that the suppression of the feminine principle has allowed the ego to gain absolute supremacy, is he saying that the ego is more male, or is he saying that the feminine principle has a way of mitigating the ego, which is both feminine and masculine? Well, here's my point of view. I never thought of the ego as being a uniquely male thing. Yes, there are egoic things that are more associated with males, but there certainly are egoic things that are associated with females, and egoic things which are just associated with not associated to gender at all. They're just egoic things.
Well, in general, the ego is always looked at as a neither male nor female. Okay, it's just, this is the I want principle. You go back to Freud, that's how he defined it, is the part of you, that's the id. The id is I want. The ego is the one that balances between that and the superego, which is a more aligned with cultural morals or good and bad. real in standard. So the ego is the part of you that's supposed to balance those two, the wants that you always have, and then the shoulds or coulds or woulds that you're being given in a society or a situation.
And that's Freud.
That's Freud.
And
that's Freud.
People. Freud is not used as a principle or as an architect. He's seen certainly as a founder of psychiatry, but
it's just in terms of you're defining ego, the word as he's using it.
Right.
But this observation, the way I look at it, is that when it comes to male and female energies, you can't have one without having the other. Okay, that's the whole idea of this. And that's what I find fascinating. There have been cultures that have pushed down the male ego, and there have been cultures the male energy, and other cultures that have pushed down the female energy. And both of them had self-destructed at that point. You can't destroy one without destroying all.
Well, and I would even put it, what you do to one has, in many ways, like a seesaw, like a true balance, has a direct and palpable effect on the other. So there's a wonderful principle which Einstein called spooky action at a distance, about entangled quantum particles. Now, stick with me here for a second. There are many things in nature which are, in essence, dualities, entangled dualities, magnetic poles, for argument's sake. You can't have a magnetic unipole. That's sort of an interesting thing, is that magnets always come around in pairs. It seems you can have charges which are separate from each other, but this is a whole other thing. Still and all, these things occur in balance. They occur in pairs, and we see this throughout the universe. There's a certain duality to the universe. There's other symmetries and many different symmetries in the universe. But we've often talked about the principle of two becoming one, becoming infinity. This is an interesting principle. And you have to have, in a relationship, and we've talked about this many times, it isn't a half plus a half equals a whole. It's 1 plus 1, a whole plus a whole, which equals infinity. And when people talk about relationships, they say, I want to find my other half, those relationships are innately out of balance. Because if you're truly looking as a fragment, a piece of a person, a half, for another half to somehow complete you, you will both be dissatisfied, because you will never find completion in another broken piece.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the concept of a relationship is an additive process. In other words, like you just add more to it, and then you make, it's like a half a glass. So you put another half in, and there you are. That's your relationship. Very stagnant, very contained.
Yeah, it's very half glass almost. As they say, put your whole glass into it. Don't go around with a half glass. Put your whole glass in. How are we doing so far?
Oh my!
Very cheeky show tonight. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh my! In a relationship, it is more of a magnifying process. Just as if you have resonance with another one, your resonance activates the other resonance, and then you get a harmonic and an amplification of the sound in a room. A relationship is similar in terms of being able to say, I am a whole, which means that I can sing at a certain resonance. And what you're looking for is another whose resonance is similar to yours, so you both can sing together. And that amplification fills the room or fills the space.
Fills the universe.
Right. So understanding that it's a multiplicative process. If you've got a broken, you're a half, looking for a half, and you magnify that or you multiply it, a half times a half is a quarter. You don't have a relationship. You have a quarter of a person, which I think is absolutely fascinating.
Well, and
you become less than who you think you are. Isn't that an interesting thought?
Exactly. When you and to not to belabor it, but yes, when you bring two broken people or things together, they don't resonate anymore. They tend to. There's a principle called destructive interference. When you have two resonating things that don't resonate at the same frequency, they cause voids, they cancel, they cause a chaotic environment, a turbulent environment. This is what you have with this type of relationship. So maybe what we're looking at here, just to come back to our topic a little bit, suppression of the feminine principle has put, let's say, today's society or the world out of balance. It has made fragmentary and therefore allowed the ego, which I would say is neither male nor female in truth, but rather a piece of consciousness which has allowed itself to because of this imbalance, has been allowed to inflate and to take supremacy. Rather than say the ego is male or the ego is female, it isn't, it's just human. But suppressing the feminine principle has put the human society out of balance and allowed the collective, and he's talking about the collective human psyche, to become ego-dominated. That's really what we're kind of talking about. And actually he goes further and says absolute supremacy. And maybe this is an overstatement in terms, because absolute supremacy would brook no other, nothing else could exist except the ego. And that's not true. We know that's not true, especially because people like Tolle exist and many who...
Well, what he's talking about is it's almost like it's like a cancer to the collective consciousness. Because what it does is it can only exist by mutating what's there. But it's not viable. It doesn't reproduce on its own. It has to feed upon the healthy balance that's there in order to exist. And by targeting one aspect of it, believing that somehow it will gain dominance over that healthy balance is absurd, because you're actually killing the host at that point. And does the ego care if it's killing the host? There's a question.
It's a good one. It's hard to say whether it cares in the individual. I think the ego is satisfied and then works, as you just said, to continue having the focus of the energies of the consciousness, feed energy into it. So what is Tolle says this all the time? The ego creates these drama exercises, and it creates this constant chatter of reinforcement, and it tells itself how important it is all the time.
Well, it has to be fed.
Right.
Is the truth. And maybe the reason why it targets the feminine so much is that the feminine principle is emotional and it has a tendency to be much more reactive. So that energy of the emotion is something that it can feed off of. It can amp itself up and have its drama, its self-affirming ego drama.
But I would say back that it's if we take this as the statement, suppression of the feminine principle. Yeah, I think if I hear what you just said, and you're right. I believe that emotion is a wonderful thing that the ego uses to feed itself. Get yourself all spun up, and whether it starts with thoughts which trigger emotions and so on, or whether it starts with emotions which then trigger the complementary thoughts. But I think for the ego to begin to grow, as you said, as a cancer, it needs a precipitating event. And I think the precipitating event is you have an unbalanced human, an unbalanced collective human psyche. Once you have that, you can start to see these ego bubbles, if you will, pop up and begin to feed on that unbalanced collective.
Well, there are things. Totally does mention something called the pain body, and the pain body is an experience that, unless it is really dealt with in pure consciousness or awareness, it's going to rise up again in your being state and try to dominate, because it becomes hungry and it needs to be fed.
Exactly.
And so that happens on an individual basis and it happens also on a collective basis. Because those pain bodies, he calls them entities, they look for other like-minded things, and in a collective they gather and basically feed off each other or try to trigger their human subjects into a frenzy so they can have their drama so that they can feed. It just sounds awful, frankly.
Well, and exactly, once you've already knocked, well, what you basically said is that the ego is looking for other like-minded, let's say, entities with which it can trade these kind of unbalanced energies.
Well, in order to feed, it needs to have a conflict. So it's looking for others that are easily manageable, that can have a conflict. Those that have easy hot buttons, that all it has to do is hit that, and then it can lord it over, gaslight. It can just act on that and just say, well, if you were really advanced in consciousness, maybe you need to calm down a little bit.
Well, but I wanted to come back a little bit and just say that the ego is in essence looking for an analog of the resonance of wholes. It's looking for something which is already out of balance. In a system which is in balance, it is difficult to move it out of balance. The example would be a gyroscope. I think everyone's familiar with a top. When it spins, as long as it's spinning, it's in a certain type of balance. And if you try to push it off, it resists it. It kind of keeps itself orientated.
Yeah.
There's a principle behind that, but it doesn't matter what the principle is. The idea is, if a system is in balance, it's difficult to push the system out of balance. You have to expend a lot of energy to move a system out of balance. But once you get the system out of balance, once that top starts to wobble, then it becomes just the tiniest little touch, one little grain of dirt in its path, and it'll go flying off into any direction.
A gyroscope's got to have a certain amount of energy to keep it going. And as long as that energy is flowing, it is very stable and can't be shoved over. Right. But the minute you take away the energy, it becomes easier to destabilize it.
Exactly. And when you talk about a collective human psyche, the collective has a tendency to be in a balanced state, as does nature around it. You see that balance arises because it's a basic part of the creation of the actual physicality of the world. It arises in many different subtle ways, from the smallest balances to the largest balances. So balance tends to arise. You would say spontaneously, but it's built upon the basic principles why you have balance. So in order to destabilize the system, you have to do something actively. The system in and of itself is stable. Suppression of one part of the system is like putting your hand on the top and slowing it down, or making sure that you sap the energy or tilt the playing field that it's on so it goes off in one direction or another. So suppressing that feminine principle, and you said it earlier, you could suppress the masculine principle. You can suppress any part of the system and make the system go into an unbalanced state. And what is gained by that is that the ego finds a lot of fragmentary, easily triggered, hot button type situations, drama and thoughts and emotions that it can feed off of. So the ego has a vested interest in instability of both the individual and the collective.
And the other thing I found interesting, because in general the masculine principle is very good at direct action. Okay, it understands direct action. Feminine has a tendency to, it does more of a sweeping or curving kind of inclusiveness, taking things into account. So if the ego comes against a very direct principle, it's harder for it to manage it because it just goes. I've always said this, males intuitively understand how power works much better than females do. It's a more direct thing. The female understanding of power is more of a almost a spherical form, a radiant form, and it's very aware of where the flows happen to be.
Well, I think the feminine power is generally more balanced. I'll say it this way. Females in power tend to be more inclusive and also more understanding. That's you can find exceptions to every rule, but I'm just saying in general, if you find males in power, it's more third chakra, and I would say, although everything in power is more third chakra, it tends to be, as you said, more in the power over, power under, sort of action-oriented. Do this, don't talk back. There isn't any kind of idea of byplay understanding, and then a decision may be made. So there's certainly power on both sides, feminine and masculine power, and I think there's an understanding of power on both sides. But if you're saying that one is more easily suppressed, maybe, I don't know, I think you pick one or the other.
Well, what I'm saying is it goes back again to the fact that the ego needs the drama.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the tendency of the mind is to be distracted by dramas.
Right. Well, I mean, we've often spoken about there is the ego which concentrates on thought, rather the mental aspect, the kind of lists and plans and worries and anxieties and all these kinds of things. And then there's sort of the emotional entities. You can kick one off with the other. Emotional triggers will feed into thoughts, which will then amplify emotions, or thoughts can trigger an emotional response, which then feeds back into more, psychoses or neuroses. So I think that's equally present in both genders, in my opinion. But once you to get there, to this imbalanced state, you have to do something societally. If you have a society that is in good balance, so the power structures you mentioned, feminine power and masculine power, if they're in good balance, one checks the other, or one. The feminine principle will balance and complement the masculine principle, and similarly, the masculine principle will balance and complement the feminine principle. Once you suppress one or the other, and it doesn't matter, I don't think, which. You're maybe arguing that one can be more easily suppressed than the other. Maybe not, maybe so. But once you suppress one or the other, you already have a volatile situation.
Well, the statement from Tolle is suppression of the feminine principle has enabled the ego to gain absolute supremacy in the collective human psyche. The feminine principle has to do a lot with coordinating and taking others into account. So when you remove that, okay, then it's all about you.
Yes, okay. Yes. If you say that the ego is much more I-centered, which is a pretty safe statement, the feminine principle would be, in and of itself, less susceptible to the I-centered ego. Maybe more susceptible, as you mentioned, to the emotion-triggered ego. But there's still a balance there. If you have both, you have the balance of emotion and thought. But if you suppress one, and you have more of this I am, I do, I'm better than you, you're not me, all these kinds of ego thought forms, which can then feed and trigger ego emotion forms, and get that whole thing going back and forth in a bad way. Yeah.
Because feminine, you're trying to allow others to participate, and that naturally brings you into a more of a balanced state when you're in a group. But if you have dropped that and say, well, no, we're not going to do that because this is not feeding me, the ego's basically screaming that it's not getting fed the way it wants to. And you're the reason.
It's all your fault.
And it's all your fault.
Well, and you can see where that goes, and I would agree with you. The certainly it's a statement of the zeitgeist, our current times, and we started this, that it's very patently obvious that the feminine principle in the current world is under attack. Is it under attack from the male principle? I don't know. It's certainly under attack, and to the extent that is successful, you end up with an unbalanced society. But let's go ahead.
The system is under attack.
Yes, this collective human psyche. But as the cat reminds us, it is the middle of the hour. So why don't we take a break, find out what the cat wants. We'll go back to the studio, and we'll come back on the other side, and we'll talk more about the ego.
Little kitty.
There is a Reaper is the story of 5-year-old Christopher Aaron and his life-changing struggle with leukemia. Winner of both the Indie Brag Medallion as well as the reader's favorite silver medal for memoir, There is a Reaper has more than 100 Amazon book reviews and a 5-star rating. It has been described as life-changing, spiritual, a must-read. Just released on Audible and iTunes, this memoir is also available in paperback and on Amazon Kindle for only 99 cents. Get your copy of this life-changing memoir today.
The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed is the latest book from Michael Lyons, the award-winning author of There is a Reaper. Featuring 13 original stories, this wide-ranging collection has everything. Forbidden love, gods versus demigods, weird invading aliens, sexy seductive artificial intelligence, and unusual passion between the living and the dead. All set amidst fantastic worlds of pain and loss and boundless joy. From the sublime to the macabre to the bittersweet, The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed will leave you breathless with laughter, brimming with tears, trembling with suspense. Available now on Amazon.com, Google Play, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. The wait is over. First Blood, Book 2 of the Blood series is out. Your favorite bad boy thief, Dev, is back, and the beautiful and deadly Trey is right there with him. She is sharp, sexy, and full of surprises. Their adventures continue as a new power arises to threaten the world. The heart of creation is under attack, and time is definitely not on their side as they battle against their enemies' undead hordes. Can they unlock the hidden power that can defeat him, or will his forces draw first blood? Get all 3 installments in the series. Book 0, It's in the Blood. Book 1, Destroyer's Blood, and the new release, Book 2, First Blood, today. Available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, and most other fine e-tailers.
Hello, this is Highway 59 recording artist Randy Moore, and you are listening to the ArtistFirst Radio Network.
Moonstones and murder. Real murderers need a heart of stone. Meet Maggie and Mike Heartstone. Parents of twin boys, entrepreneurs, and now empty nesters. Mike is retired, not by choice, from his position as chief of police in the picturesque resort town of Hamilton. And now his wife Maggie and her shop, the Cozy Crystal, are their only source of income. When a mysterious killing interrupts Hamilton's famous Springfield Park rock show, the townsfolk, the Cozy Crystal, and their lives are rocked to the core. Can Mike and Maggie figure out who is behind the murderous deeds before the town comes crashing down around them? A touch of romance, a little mayhem, and a whole lot of suspense, along with plenty of comedy and thrills galore. Get your crystal magnifying glass out. It's time for some moonstones and murder. Available on Amazon, Apple, Kobo, and other fine e-tailers in ebook and paperback. Out soon on Audible. Get your copy today.
Rick Riordan fans, love mythology with plenty of action and humor? Destroyer's Blood is for you. The new fantasy novel by award-winning author Michael Lyons is Book 1 of the adventures of Dev Kalian, the Blood series. Follow Dev and his magic sword Betrayer as they are suddenly attacked and forced to return to Olympus to fight in a war they want no part in. The world of men and gods is about to be destroyed by Zeus's ancient foe, and only Dev and Trey can stop him. The conflict never stops, and the amazing twist will have you on the edge of your seat. Act now while the ebook is on sale for only 99 cents. Destroyer's Blood is available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. And while you're there, get the free prequel, It's in the Blood, available for a limited time.
Hi, this is Amanda Gray. Check out my new book, Glimpses of Grace in Georgia. Available on Westbow Press Bookstore, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. More information can be found at my website, www.glimpsesofgraceingeorgia.com, and you are listening to the ArtistFirst Radio Network.
joining us on The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Back to your hosts, Michael and Margaret Lines.
Thank you very much, Z-Man. And tonight we are talking about the suppression of the feminine principle. And I officially do not have an opinion.
Okay.
That's not true. Everyone has their feminine side. In truth, in fact, all human beings, Margaret, I would say, as what's that? Is it a Greek myth where the every human being, when human beings were first created, they were both male and female, basically a inseparable duality. And in fact, in the creation story in Adam and Eve, when Adam is first created, he is not, and I say he, but Adam is not identified as either male or female. The Lord God creates the man out of the earth, but it's a translation, of course, from the ancient Aramaic or Hebrew or whatever it was, and he removes a piece of that being, much as they do, as is done with the dual being in the Greek legend, and in separating the two, then the duality begins. Then it's male and female have created them. So there is in a balanced human being, in an actual being, there is a duality of the ego, of the feminine and the masculine principle. When you see here in Tolle, he's talking about the suppression of the feminine principle, I think he's talking about it not only in just the collective, but also in the individual. The suppression of the feminine principle in all individuals, both women and men, is an imbalance which has permeated our current society.
Well, the imbalance is there. And frankly, the ego doesn't really care as long as it's in charge. And the easiest way to control is by manipulating things so that there is an imbalance that it can regulate on its own. But it has to be, that's the interesting thing about the top as an example, the system itself has got to be so low in energy. In other words, the male and the female are not flowing. It's like the Tao. The male and the female within the symbol are constantly moving. It's not a stagnant thing. It has to do with relationship. And it's understanding that constant flow is an energetic. And without that back and forth, then things die. The relationship dies for lack of that flow. And what do you always hear? Ego complaints after that point.
But there's two wonderful points there. After the energy is sapped out of the system is when the ego rises. And you notice in the Tao, as you said, it's not a static form. It's a dynamic form. It's also not a two-dimensional form. It's a three-dimensional form. And you'll see in very, very wisely, the creation of the Tao shows the yin and the yang, the light and the dark, the duality. And then within each duality, there is a piece of the other. So there's a reflection of the feminine principle in I'm not sure which one is the yin or the yang, but there's a reflection of the yang and the yin, and there's a reflection of the yin and the yang.
One has a dark eye and the other has a light eye,
right.
Which means that when the other has filled your sight, your vision, you're focused completely on the other. In other words, that movement and that energy only happens when you keep each other in mind. Ego has a tendency to want you not to do that, to get you out of that. and to concentrate on what it chooses. So when that happens, the energy level drops in a relationship. The flow and the communication drops in a relationship. And it becomes vulnerable to ego dominance, whether from one side or the other. It almost becomes a moot point because that flow is no longer there. The energy to stabilize the system is no longer there.
I mean, chakras too. I mean, people know the term chakra, but chakras are wheels. Chakras are spinning three-dimensional forms. They're energy centers and points within the body. Well, when chakras become out of balance, they spin badly. They don't have the energy flows. They
get blocked.
They get blocked. But in blocking them, it redirects, or it's like taking a beautiful flowing river of energy and bollocksing it up somehow. Also, ancient forms of medicines, Chinese medicine and the Hindu medicines, the what's the name?
Ayurvedic.
Yes, the Ayurvedic. They're all about reestablishing flow and balance and energy. And when someone who's practitioner of these arts looks at you, they're looking for what parts of your energy flows are bollocksed up, tied in a knot. You'll say, someone will say to you, well, your this or that chakra is not flowing, it's tied up, it's blocking. Or in Chinese medicine, you'll say, well, this energy flow line is blocked and it needs to be opened up and allow you to have the chi flow.
The gates and the channels. Yeah.
Gates and channels. These are good. No, not good. They're excellent intuitive analogs for the balance, which is part of this incarnations, where we find being incarnated in flesh with the flows, and then when you get out of balance, disease, dis-ease comes into the body, and with relationships, ego forms, or pain body forms, or emotion energy entities, or ego entities and mental entities crop up and start to, in essence, do what is like a blockage in your consciousness energy. It's blocking your awareness. It's blocking your ability to perceive the actual reality. It's taking you into the past. There's a lot of blockages back there. Taking you into the future. A lot of anxiety and fear and planning and lists and nonsense like that. So these things allow this ego dominance, these ego entities to occur. But they're all born from imbalance.
The imbalance or the lack of flow allows for other things to begin to take over the system. And it's interesting when you think about that male and female dynamic, where the energy, it's a male-female energy dynamic, which is flowing. It's life energy that flows. And in that, when you understand that you absolutely need to participate in life, and that is very key for any individual, is taking care of that relationship, especially if you're committed to one another, married. That back and forth is key, but it's not using your concept of self as the center. When you see, again, going back to the Tao, or the yin and yang, the I is showing the other as what is first in the mind, or first in the concerns. If it's your ego, then you would just be this one drop with with no I.
Blinded by ego.
Exactly.
And we have that concept in English, that you can be blinded by your ego, that your concerns are first. When you meet somebody who is consumed by ego, you feel drained through interaction with them because it is all about them, isn't it? And it's, well, enough of me going on and on about me. What do you think about me? It's a joke, but it is what you feel when you're dealing with an egocentric person. You've been looking at some interesting videos of a woman who's a psychiatrist whose focus is on narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a perfect reflection of what Tolle is talking about here, because suppression of the feminine principle has enabled the ego. The ego is a consummate narcissist. the ego is all about me. So to the extent that you revel, that you allow the ego to become you, that you identify with the ego's concerns, you become more and more, as Margaret just said, self-focused. Your Tao becomes darker and darker, or lighter and lighter, so your eye is filled with nothing but you. You become Narcissus. You fall in love with your reflection, and a narcissist, a true clinical narcissist, has no other concern than their own identity, their own thoughts and pleasures and feelings, and to the extent that they can manipulate others to gratify is all their interactions are about. Just that, manipulating all others to gratify their own ego.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty much the definition of a narcissist. Completely concerned with what they want or what they need, or you're not satisfying what I want, or I want, or I need, or a validation, etc., etc.
And manipulation. They take in relationship, all they're looking for is someone to feed their ego trip.
And what I thought was interesting, this lady I had been listening to, her name is Dr. Ramani, and I would certainly recommend listening to her videos on narcissism. Fascinating. But to understand that the narcissist really is exceedingly insecure. And I had never thought of that before. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Because you think of a narcissist, they're always someone who's so into themselves, they're just, I'm wonderful. And you're thinking, well, that's what they must be thinking inside, but it's not. They feel completely inadequate and overcompensate in any way possible to make themselves feel better. And that's fascinating.
It's very sad in one regard, as with all clinical mental health issues. Narcissism is certainly, though I think, one of the more predominant ones, again, because of where we are. We started and said that what the feminine principle is under attack, it is, but what gains from that is a narcissistic expression of ego. When your identity is wrapped in ego, or whether when you identify, everything about you is the I am this, I am that. It's like we talked about this several different contexts. Ego is like a balloon which you have to constantly blow hot air into. Right? And the narcissist is looking for others to blow hot air into their balloon. They're trying their best to do it themselves, but they also want everyone else to blow hot air into their balloon. And one of the, I don't remember if it was if he was a guru or what, but he was talking very much about ego bubbles, about the bubble of ego and the fact that it has to be constantly inflated. You have to constantly be blowing hot air into your ego bubble to keep it afloat, keep it expanded, because if it starts to cool down, it starts to shrink. The energy goes out of it. And what his, in applying the true principles of, in this case, I believe it was Hindu teachings, you want to deflate those ego bubbles. You want to let the air out of them. You want to shrink them further and further and further, and come to allow the true consciousness, allow the true self to expand. This again requires balance. You have to rebalance yourself and realize that this hot air that you're constantly blowing into the bubble is a waste of your energy, waste of everyone else's energy.
The phrase that comes to mind is being comfortable in your skin, where you know who and what you are, you know your flows within yourself, you know what's you and what's not. No one can tell you otherwise. You know exactly how you feel about something, and you can't be sidetracked, or who you are and can't be sidetracked. People will accuse you of such and such, and it's like, nope.
And you, in doing that, you reach the deeper realization that you are not the ego. You're not a scientist. You're not an engineer. You're not your emotions. You find that you are beyond and encompassing all those things. In the simple principle of the monk, the little monk who says, "Is that so?" you see an egoless response, a response which gives no air to the bubble. The bubble comes to you, this giant bubble of accusation, this giant bubble of emotion, this giant bubble of you did this and you did this and you're this and you're that, and you just say, "Is that so?" Giving it absolutely nothing. In fact, putting a big pinprick in it, letting the air out of it. And somebody says, "Well," and you notice when you meet narcissism or ego bubbles with this kind of openness, calmness, refusal to add energy to the system, to the unstable system, it dissipates. If you don't allow yourself to be pulled into the future of worry or pulled into the past of regret, those things become a closed off. They don't drain you. Those who come to you with their narcissism and their ego bubbles will avoid you rather quickly when you don't feed their ego bubbles. If you just give them, right?
Right. No, that's one of the things that was discussed on that video. Was
Dr. Ramani.
Right. Was that to identify a narcissist, and they're always looking for a soft target, someone who will listen to them, who will give in to. So when gaslighting starts, like, "Oh, well, you really don't feel that way. This is not," and to come back with, "No, you cannot devalue my feelings about this. I feel this way, whether it's validated by them or not. This is how I feel." And they go, "Oh." And they may try to spin a little bit, "Oh, well, maybe you're sensitive or something." But it's like, no, this is how I feel. They back away because they realize that you can't be downgraded or manipulated in that particular way. You're really aware. I liken that to like when you're walking in the city.
Yes, yeah.
You're aware when someone is looking at you, checking you out to see if you're a mark or not, if you're easily vulnerable. And the most direct way is to turn and just meet the eyes of the person that's looking at you, and making note of, "I see you." They don't want to be seen. And the narcissist is the same way. He or she does not want to be seen.
Yes, and why don't they want to be seen? Because what again, as the basic insecurity which drives this whole thing, this whole ego bubble, this whole narcissism bubble. If someone comes back to you and so with a very strong, centered, grounded, balanced, I feel this, I think this, not I am feeling
Correct.
this or I am thinking this, but I
Correct.
feel this,
Mm-hmm.
I think this. So they come to you with all their spin, and you say, I think this. And they're like, no, you don't. No. I think this, or I feel this about that. This strikes into the core of their insecurity, because they're like, well, I don't know how I feel, and I don't know how I think. And this one does. Ooh, I gotta back up. I can't spin this into somebody validating me through the indirectly validating me by agreeing with me all the time or by feeding my ego.
Right.
And
Right.
because you're not validating the insecurity, not the big, flashy, sparkly security they're putting on the outside, but the insecurity, they feel seen. Just as you said with the city. If you're in the city, Margaret grew up, of course, in the city. I did not, so she's a city mouse, and I am just a poor country mouse, suburban mouse, I think. But anyway, you were able to viscerally walk down the street and with your energy control the situation. It's like there's a person who does this with animals, and it's not the same thing because these are human beings. But if you are projecting the feeling of I see you, I'm aware, I'm not distracted, I'm in the now, in the moment, you're not a mark.
Well, I'm not afraid.
And I'm not afraid.
Because they're looking for someone to be afraid, to be able to say, okay, I can use that to my advantage.
Right.
Like, I'm not afraid. What do I have to be afraid of with you?
It becomes, instead of an attack from a point of safety where you are going to surprise someone, you say, I see you. You can't surprise me. I'm ready for you. If you do attack, it's going to be a much harder, much more difficult battle where I am immediately aware of you and already countering you through energy. Again, human beings, we like to think of ourselves as being words and thoughts and emotions, but it's energy. All these are energy forms, and at a certain level, you sense another's energy before you ever talk to them, before you ever come even close to them. And if they're projecting back to you the energy of secure awareness, if you're not secure and you're not aware and you're looking for an easy target, that repels, that scares, that engenders, ooh, this one sees me.
Right. And if it happens in a family,
yeah,
whoever it may be, some relative, and they're looking at you like, oh, why are you so confident? They will try to tear you down.
Can do. But
because they don't feel comfortable. How dare you make me feel uncomfortable?
Well, yeah, and that's the narcissist right there too.
Yeah.
But you know what makes me feel comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
I feel comfortable in saying that this is the end of the show, and I
right.
survived. And I am Michael Lyon.
And I am Margaret, and thank you for listening.